Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, earlier this year, schools around the country received more than $100 billion from the federal government, American taxpayers in truth, in order to recover from the pandemic and finally get back to the task of teaching kids. The Fed stipulated that 20% of that money may be put toward addressing learning losses during the pandemic, but the bulk of it should be spent at schools' discretion, which means, of course, that many schools are using this sudden injection of cash to make improvements that have nothing to do with keeping COVID at bay. Quote, some districts are investing big money in initiatives that don't appear at first glance strictly COVID-related, notes Education Week. Miami-Dade schools plan to spend $30 million or $86 per student on cybersecurity. Raleigh County schools in West Virginia list a $9 million effort, more than $800 per student, to expand an elementary school, adding 9 classrooms, upgrading the library, expanding the kitchen, and separating the cafeteria and the gym. The Newport News School District in Virginia is spending $840,000 for a new student information system to help teachers catalog students' academic progress. An unnamed school district will use some of its COVID relief funds to install vape detection devices. And I really wish they'd rather not, purchase new student ID cards and build a tennis court. Indeed, many districts seem to be spending significant chunks of money on upgrading athletic facilities and expanding stadiums. According to Education Week, athletics can be an important part of many students' lives, and letting kids get back to sports was a good reason, among many, to move away from the soul-crushing farce of virtual learning and get everybody back in physical school. But a slightly nicer football field probably isn't going to improve students' test scores or make them safer from COVID, which, after all, are the two primary justifications for all this spending. In October, ProPublica detailed one Texas school district's plan to, quote, spend $4 million of its education pandemic relief funds to construct a 5-acre outdoor learning environment connected to a local nature and birding center owned by the city. It's a birding center. The project is not expected to be completed until 2024, at which point it will no longer be necessary, hopefully, to hold classes outdoors. This extreme long-term thinking is bad. We need to help kids right now. The American public education system's grand reopening, which largely took place this fall, has not produced severe outbreaks of COVID-19 in schools. Given this, it might actually make some sense for schools to spend the money on things that don't involve pandemic mitigation. Of course, if they spend the money on personnel, they could eventually end up with a shortfall once the pile runs out. Districts certainly won't want to lower salaries or fire staff once that happens. We don't want to end up in a situation where the money is distributed to staff and then when it runs out, school districts demand more money, nor do we want to operate in permanent pandemic mode. Moving mealtime outdoors during the early fall and late spring semesters might have been perfectly fine, but as I reported in a radar last week, there are currently public school students in the northeast part of the country that are currently being forced to eat outside in the cold. Those kids can't wait around for schools to build outdoor COVID-safe facilities. They need to be moved back inside this very instant. So it'll be tempting to spend the money on building and equipment upgrades. And look, some of that is certainly justified, but let's keep in mind that the central mission of the K-12 system is to provide a daycare function for families who need it and to teach fundamental skills, particularly in the areas of reading and math. The California school system, however, recently decided to move away from offering advanced math courses to gifted students. The reason? Inequality. The ingenious progressives within the education system decided it would worsen inequality to let some students take calculus in high school ahead of others. Quote, the inequity of mathematics tracking in California can be undone through a coordinated approach in grades 6 through 12, reads a memo from January 2021, a draft of the new math guidelines. In summary, middle school students are best served in heterogeneous classes. Heterogeneous classes, everybody's the same, everybody has to take the same classes at the same level at all times. In other words, the state wants to hold back gifted students to make them equal to other students. This approach is terrible. No kid who struggles at math should have to take calculus, but kids who excel at math should rapidly progress through it. Keeping everybody at the same level is absurd and wrong, which is why 600 education experts recently signed an open letter calling on the state of California to reconsider its new standards. Quote, reducing access to advanced mathematics and elevating trendy but shallow courses over foundational skills would cause lasting damage to STEM education in the country and exacerbate inequality, they write. So I bring up this issue to make the point that when it comes to schools, the issue isn't always money. Many schools are doing a bad job of educating kids, not because they lack the proper funding, but because they aren't even trying. California no longer wants to try to teach advanced math to its high schoolers, and no amount of COVID relief funding will change the state's mind. It's an ideological commitment to failure. And make no mistake, the decision on how to spend the COVID money will rest almost entirely with state and local officials. The federal government has asked states to pay attention to where the money is going, but there's little incentive for districts to report responsibly. In North Carolina, several colleges with fewer students receive significantly more money than other colleges that enroll more students. WRAL, a local station, asked dozens of these schools to explain how they plan to spend the money. Not a single one replied. So Ryan, we're going to be trying to figure out for years to come where this money went and how it was spent. And local officials, some of them, not everywhere, but some of them are going to do really bad bookkeeping. It's going to turn out that they gave up everybody raises or got a new gym stadium. And look, it's hard, I think, to decide exactly how to spend some of these funds, because if you hire a bunch more people or you raise salaries, then when the money runs out, you don't want to undo those kinds of changes. So I understand why they would want to somewhat prioritize buildings, although I don't want vape detectors in schools, and tennis court seems a little far-fetched. What do you think?
I mean, ventilation seems like the way to spend this money. I mean, that's the most COVID-related thing that you can think of, and it also has all sorts of other, downstream educational and kind of health effects, like kids breathing dirty air. It makes it harder for them to learn, makes them sicker over the long term. Kids breathing cleaner air makes them happier, it makes it easier to learn. Like, the statistics on this are poignant in a way. When you see how much damage dirty air is doing to kids, and so if that also makes it more likely that the kids can come in from lunch to eat inside because of COVID, all the better. Now, the good news is that because of climate change, we're having a disconcertingly warm winter here on the East Coast. And so it's practically T-shirt weather in December. And so, 10 years ago, the kids would be eating their lunch with their mittens on. It's hard enough in elementary school to eat your lunch, period, in the amount of time that they give you. Doing it with mittens on or doing it without getting frostbite is really asking them to do much. So thankfully, we have warmed the climate to such a place that during this pandemic, the children can eat outside with less suffering.
That we're having our own the medieval warming period where the Vikings went to Iceland and to North America. There are good effects too.
Right.
But I wanted to get so I've been following as well this changing math standards in California all year, and it's really it got some attention in conservative media and right-wing media, but there's something to this. I looked at the memo; it's pretty crazy, and so these educators recently put out this statement expressing concern. And look, I will be the first to say that kids do not need to take calculus or advanced math if they don't have any natural aptitude for it. I am one of those kids. You can tell by fifth grade, which kids, for the most part, in 98% of cases, which kids will excel in math and which kids will not. And the ones who excel at it, so the ones who have no aptitude for it, fine. They get them whatever, just basic math is not making you a more fully rounded, more of a humanist. If you have no interest in it, you can study or do something else. But kids who do have an aptitude for it, they should be able to progress through it rapidly, and they should be taking calculus before college. There's no reason to hold them up just because other kids aren't doing as well. So this idea that a heterogeneous approach is what should be strived for makes absolutely no sense, except if you have some kind of ideological commitment to conformity.
And so, so what is the new policy exactly? That they're going to make everyone stick at the same pace?
Yeah, the policy explicitly discourages moving kids into different tracks. Whereas these kids will take an advanced math course, so they'll be taking, advanced algebra and trig in, their 9th or 10th grade year, and so that they can do pre-calc and calc 11th and 12th before they get to college. They want to hold, they want to discuss those concepts, but for the whole classroom, so that the kids who are not as as gifted, that they can still be exposed to them, instead of having the more advanced kids in a different track, in a different class.
Yeah, and that's a really bad idea. And I think, part of it is that it's a symptom of the problematic way that we think about innate intelligence. Like there is such a thing as people who are born smarter than other people, and we think about that as a kind of qualitatively good thing, as if it's a virtue. And when we talk about a meritocracy, like that's one of the merits that we say people have, but we don't necessarily need to think of it like that. In some ways, being smart is, you might be lucky to have been born smart, but it certainly does not guarantee you a happy life. It doesn't guarantee you a prosperous life. It is just a thing that you were born with. And so when we say that we need to meet kids where they are, we need to understand that those kids are at that different level. And so not only are you not helping the kids who are born kind of average intelligence and aren't going to kind of ease into calculus in high school, but you're making school a lot harder in a lot of ways for a lot of these smarter kids who are then just going to be just tremendously bored in school and miserable. And a lot of them will either drop out of school, or they will kind of give up on their ambitions and will kind of just be stuck in this place where they are. And so, I think it's doing a disservice to pretty much everybody across the board. I haven't read his book. Freddie DeBoer wrote a book about how along these themes. I haven't read that book, but I kind of get the concept, and I think it's kind of a counterintuitive thing to say, but I understand where he's coming from, and I think he's right.
Yeah, I do too. I've learned a lot from him on this subject. He's a great writer. Audience should check him out. But yeah, he argues it's not a moral judgment on people who are not as gifted academically. You are just as fully human and entitled to the same rights as everyone else. But you don't need people who have different abilities. That is fine. That's not a moral judgment. The school system doesn't need to flatten everyone with a hammer because of it. Right. So anyway, we'll have more Rising right after this.